The phone rang at 2 in the morning, and I knew who it was before I even reached for it. Meredith, my daughter-in-law. The same woman who only 2 weeks earlier had looked me straight in the eye across her own dinner table and told me that I did not matter enough to keep around. Her voice came through the speaker in broken pieces. She was crying so hard I could barely make out the words. Please answer. Something happened tonight and I think it has to do with you. I need you. Please pick up. I sat up slowly in my bed in my plain little house on the east side of Fort Worth, and I let her talk. I did not say a single word. Outside my window, the street was dark and silent. Inside my chest, something was very, very calm. For 8 long years, I had answered every call from that family the instant it rang. I had dropped whatever was in my hands. I had driven across the whole city at midnight. I had wired money before the sun came up. And now at 2 in the morning, I let Meredith sob into the phone, and I felt the strangest thing of all. I felt still. But to understand that night, you first have to understand the 8 years that came before it. You have to understand who they thought I was and who I actually am. So let me take you back. Let me tell you about the quiet old woman they decided they could live without. My name is Bonnie Hollingsworth. To everyone who met me, I was a modest widow who lived frugally in an old neighborhood. I drove a gray sedan from 2011 with a scratch on the bumper I never bothered to fix. I carried a worn leather handbag that my daughter-in-law eyed with open disgust every time she saw it. I shopped at discount markets. I wore the same coats for years. I let the paint on my house go dull and the garden go a little wild. Everyone who looked at me saw the same thing. A poor, simple old lady. Someone to be tolerated. Someone to be managed. Nobody bothered to look any closer, and that was exactly how I wanted it, because the truth was something none of them ever imagined. That plain little woman in the discount coat was worth nearly $40 million. I had built a company from nothing, cooked the very first product of it on my own stove, and grown it into a brand sold in stores across the entire country. But I will get to all of that. First, you need to know how it started, because the beginning explains everything. My husband Leonard died 38 years ago. Wade, our son, was only 4 years old. One ordinary morning, Leonard kissed us both goodbye, drove to work, and never came home. A truck ran a red light. Just like that, I was a widow with a small boy, a mortgaged house, and a stack of bills I had no idea how to pay. We had a dog back then, a scruffy little mixed breed named Biscuit. He had been Leonard's dog first and after the funeral. That dog would not leave my son's side. Biscuit slept in Wade's doorway every night like a small brown guard. And then Biscuit got sick. His stomach could not hold food. The veterinarian said he needed a special diet, a prescription food, and the price of it made my throat close up. I could barely feed my son and myself. I stood in that animal clinic and I felt like the whole world was laughing at me. So I went home and I did the only thing I knew how to do. I cooked. I learned everything I could about what a sick dog could safely eat. I studied nutrition at the public library at night after Wade was asleep. I bought cheap cuts of meat and simple vegetables, and I made small batches on my own stove, testing and adjusting week after week. And Biscuit got better. He got strong again. He lived 9 more good years. The neighbors noticed. One of them had a dog with the same trouble, and she asked me to make some for her, too. Then another asked. Then a small pet store 2 streets over asked if they could sell my little jars on their shelf. I named it Meadowbark after the field behind the house where Leonard used to walk that dog. I registered the company as Whitfield Provisions using my mother's maiden name because even then I liked keeping the real engine of things out of sight. I worked like a woman possessed. I cleaned offices at night for steady cash. I watched neighborhood children during the day for a little extra. I slept 4 hours and I poured every spare dollar back into the business. Batch by batch, jar by jar, store by store, Meadowbark grew. 10 years in it was in regional chains. 20 years in it was national. I hired a sharp young operations man named Franklin Vance to run the daily machine, and I kept a brilliant lawyer named Ramona Kessler at my side. Ramona and I had met 4 decades earlier when she was fresh out of law school, and I was a broke widow with a dream nobody believed in. We built the whole thing together. By the time my son was a grown man, I was quietly one of the wealthiest women in the city. But I never changed how I lived. Partly it was habit. Partly it was fear that money changes people, and I had watched it change too many. So I kept the old house. I kept the old car. I kept the worn handbag. And I told my son almost nothing. Wade grew up believing we had always been just barely getting by. I protected him from the struggle when he was small because that was my job as his mother. But somewhere along the way, protecting him became hiding from him, and hiding became a habit I could not break. He never once asked how the bills got paid. He simply assumed the way children do that food appeared and clothes appeared and the lights stayed on. And when he became a man, that assumption never went away. It only got more expensive. I met Meredith 8 years ago at an upscale restaurant downtown where the water came in bottles and the prices were not printed on the menu. Wade had been dating her for a few months and he was glowing. He wanted my blessing. Meredith arrived in a coral dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage once had. Her hair fell perfectly over her shoulders. She was polished and quick, and she knew exactly how to charm a room. She shook my hand and smiled a smile that never reached her eyes. "It is so nice to finally meet you, Miss Bonnie," she said. And in the half-second before she said it, I watched her do the math. Her gaze swept over my plain dress, my sensible shoes, my off-brand purse, and I could see her file me away in her mind. The poor mother. The simple old woman from the old part of town. Nobody important. Nobody to worry about. I smiled back and said nothing, because I had learned long ago that people tell you everything about themselves in the first 30 seconds, if you just stay quiet and let them. The wedding came less than a year later. Meredith wanted a spectacular one, an exclusive venue, imported flowers, a dress that cost $15,000. One night Wade called me and I could hear the panic in his voice. "Mom," he said, "I do not know how we are going to pay for all of this. It is spiraling." I told him not to worry. The next day, I quietly moved $50,000 to cover it. When he asked where I had found that kind of money, I told him I had sold some of his grandmother's old jewelry. He believed me instantly. Of course he did. Everyone always believed whatever I told them because I was just Bonnie the widow who clipped coupons and drove an old car. There was nothing on the surface to question, so nobody ever questioned it. That was the first stone. After that, the whole road just built itself. I never handed them naked stacks of cash. I was smarter than that and quieter than that. I did it in ways they would never trace. When they wanted a beautiful condominium in a new building, I bought the building. I bought it through a separate company called Cedar Hollow Holdings, an anonymous entity with my name nowhere on the public paperwork. Then I made them tenants and quietly charged them a rent far below what the place was worth. When they fell behind, and they were often behind Cedar Hollow, simply absorbed it and never pressed. They thought they had a generous, distant landlord. They had me. I put them as authorized users on a corporate credit account under Whitfield Provisions, and every month my company paid the balance in full. Meredith never knew whose money kept those cards alive. She only knew the cards always worked. I covered the car. I covered the vacations to Cabo and the long weekends in New York. I gave Wade a company fuel and expense card and told him it was a small perk, and he never asked how a struggling widow's son had a perk like that. Everything flowed through hidden channels and appeared in their lives like weather. They never saw the source. They never once looked for it. Over 8 years, when I finally added it all together, the rent I forgave the cards. I paid the wedding, the car, the trips, the transfers. It came to roughly $1.2 million. Every cent of it documented. Every cent of it reported properly to the government by my accountant, because I do things clean, or I do not do them at all. $1.2 million poured quietly into the beautiful life of my son and his wife, while they treated me like a stain they had to keep out of sight. And here is the part that still makes me want to laugh and cry at the same time. The thing that fed their whole world was mine, and they praised it to my face without ever knowing. Meredith had a show dog, a pampered white creature named Duchess, groomed and ribboned and treated like royalty. And Meredith fed Duchess only the very best. She fed her Meadowbark, my Meadowbark. She would go on and on at family gatherings about the premium brand she trusted, the one made by real experts, the one worth every penny. Only the best for Duchess, she would say, wrinkling her nose. Then she would glance at my old mixed-breed dog, a rescue I had named after the first one, and she would add, "Not like whatever bargain scraps some people feed their pets." I would sit there and sip my water and say nothing. She was eating dinner in a home I owned, feeding her precious dog food I had invented on my own stove, and mocking me for being poor. If you had told her the truth in that moment, she would not have believed you. She had already decided who I was. Wade changed too over those years. At first he came by every week. We drank coffee at my oak table and talked for hours. Then the visits stretched to once a month, then only on holidays. He always had a reason. Work. A dinner they could not miss. Meredith needed him for something. He was not cruel, not exactly. He was just slowly, quietly drifting to the side of the person who made him feel important. And the person who made him feel important thought his mother was an embarrassment. Then Meredith's sister arrived and things went from cold to sharp. Whitney Ashford came in from abroad about 6 months before that final dinner. She worked in public relations in Europe, and she carried herself like she was doing everyone a favor by breathing their air. From the first day, she treated me like hired help. At family gatherings, she spoke over me. She interrupted my stories and changed the subject the second I started to talk. Once, right in front of everyone, she said it must be so dull to spend your whole life on such small, ordinary things. Meredith and I are used to a more dynamic world. Meredith laughed at that. Wade looked down at his plate and said nothing. He never said anything. That silence became the loudest sound in my life. Whitney was the one who planted the final seed. One evening, I arrived at their condominium early to drop off some documents. The door was open a crack, and I heard their voices out on the balcony before they heard me. I stopped in the hall, and I listened. I do not understand why you keep inviting her to everything Whitney was saying. It is awkward. She does not fit with you two. If you want to rise in this world, you have to surround yourselves with people who bring something to the table. I heard Meredith sigh. You are right, she said. I have tried to tell Wade, but she is his mother. He feels guilty. Love should not come with guilt, Whitney said. You two need boundaries. And then Wade, my son, my boy, mumbled something soft that sounded like agreement. I stood in that hallway with the documents in my hand, and I listened to my only child agree that I was a problem to be solved. I set the papers down on the entry table without a word, and I walked back out to my car. That night, for the first time in years, I cried. Not for myself, for the little boy who used to call me his hero, and for the man he had let himself become. But the tears dried fast, and in the place where they had been, something colder settled in, something patient, something that had learned a very long time ago exactly how to build a plan and wait. The dinner where it all finally broke open came 3 weeks later. Meredith organized a gathering to celebrate Wade's birthday. The condominium glowed with expensive candles. Whitney was there in a champagne-colored dress. They talked all through the meal about their wonderful lives, Wade's new contract, the trip to Europe they were planning. Nobody asked me a single question. I was furniture in an elegant room. Then Whitney turned to me with that thin smile. Bonnie, she said, do you still live in that little house in the old neighborhood? Have you never thought about moving somewhere more modern? Meredith jumped in before I could answer. Wade and I have actually talked about that, she said. Maybe it is time we looked into an assisted living place for you. I set down my fork. I am not alone, I said calmly, and I like my house. Whitney and Meredith exchanged a look. The point, Whitney said, is that you cannot lean on Wade and Meredith forever. They have their own life now. They need room to grow without unnecessary weight holding them down. The words unnecessary weight hung in the air like smoke. I turned and looked at my son. His lips parted. And then Meredith laid her hand over his, and she spoke for him. What my sister is trying to say, she said sweetly, is that maybe the time has come for everyone to go their own way. Wade and I are building something important. We need to focus on our future. And honestly, Bonnie, Wade thinks you just do not matter enough to us. We can live without you. The room went completely silent. Wade did not lift his eyes from his plate. He did not say one word. He let her say it, and he let it stand. I folded my napkin and set it beside my plate. I felt something crack inside me, but it was not the sound of breaking. It was the sound of a decision making itself. Then live without me, I said. I stood up. I picked up my worn handbag, the one Meredith had sneered at for 8 years, and I lifted my coat off the hook by the door. Nobody stopped me. Nobody reached for my hand. I walked out of that condominium, out of that building I owned, and I did not look back once. I got into my old gray car and I sat in the dark for a moment. My hands were perfectly steady. Then I took out my phone and I called the one person who had been with me since the very beginning. Ramona, I said when she answered on the second ring. It is time. Cancel every automatic transfer to Wade's account. All of them. Remove them both as authorized users on the corporate cards. Kill Wade's expense card tonight. And tell Cedar Hollow to stop absorbing a single dollar of their arrears starting now. Ramona was quiet for a moment. Bonnie, she said, are you sure? I looked up at the glowing windows of the building I had bought where my son sat at a table I had paid for eating from plates I had gifted him in a life I had built brick by hidden brick. I have never been more sure of anything in my life, I said. My son just asked to live without me. I am going to grant his wish. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my oak table with my laptop open and a cup of tea going cold beside me, and I watched the machine I had built quietly turn in a new direction. By 9 the next morning, Ramona had already done her part. The automatic transfers to Wade's account were dead. Meredith and Wade were removed as authorized users on the corporate cards under Whitfield Provisions. His expense and fuel card was canceled. And Cedar Hollow Holdings, the company that owned the building they lived in, had a new instruction on file. Stop absorbing their arrears. Charge what is owed. Collect like any landlord would. Ramona came by my house that afternoon with a thick folder under her arm. She had been my lawyer for 40 years, but she was more than that. She was the only living person who knew the whole truth of my life. She poured herself coffee and sat down across from me at the oak table, and she laid it all out. Everything is done, she said. The transfers stopped last night. The cards are frozen as of this morning. If Meredith tries to use one today, it will decline at the register. The bank will send Cedar Hollow's formal notices in the normal course. Once those go out, the clock starts. How long, I asked, before it really begins to fall apart for them? Ramona did the math the way she always did, out loud and precise. The cards are instant. Those die today. The rent is where the real weight is. They have been quietly behind for months, Bonnie. You know that. Cedar Hollow was covering the gap and never pressing. The true value of that unit is more than double what you were charging them. Now that the subsidy is gone and the arrears are on the books, the landlord has grounds. But Texas has a process, and the process takes time. We serve a proper written notice, one full rental period, 30 days. Then, if it comes to it, a separate 3-day notice to vacate. Then a filing in the local court. Weeks, not days. Nobody gets thrown into the street overnight, and I would not let you do it that way even if the law allowed it. I did not want them thrown into the street. That was never the point. I wanted them to feel the floor stop holding them up. I wanted them to learn in their own bodies what it means to live without the invisible thing that had carried them for 8 years. And I wanted them to figure out slowly that the invisible thing had a name, and the name was mine. For 3 days after that dinner, there was nothing. No call, no message. Silence. They went on with their perfect lives, not knowing the ground under their feet was already gone. And I went on with mine. I got up each morning and I dressed plainly, and I drove my old car downtown to a modest office building most people walked past without a glance. On the 4th floor was a suite of rooms nobody in my family knew existed. That was the real headquarters of Whitfield Provisions. Franklin met me at the door each day with a stack of reports. We reviewed sales numbers from 3 regions. We approved a new supplier contract. We talked through the expansion into 2 more states. I made decisions that moved millions of dollars, and then I drove home in my scratched gray sedan and heated up a simple dinner and watched the evening news. The only thing that was different now was the waiting. Every afternoon I checked my phone, not with dread, with patience. I was waiting for the exact moment that reality finally reached them. It reached Meredith first, and it reached her on a Friday. Friday was Meredith's shopping day. It always had been. She called it her therapy. Every Friday she went to the same cluster of boutiques, and she spent money that was not hers on things she did not need to impress people who did not care about her. It was as regular as the sunrise. Ramona called me a little after 11 that morning. It started, she said. There was something careful in her voice, a mix of satisfaction and concern. How do you know? I asked. I still have friends at the bank, she said. Meredith walked into a boutique at the shopping center this morning and tried to buy a handbag. The platinum card declined. She tried the second card. That declined too. She caused a scene. She insisted it was a bank error. She told the clerk she had a credit limit of $50,000 and demanded they run it again. They ran it 3 times. It declined 3 times. She left the store with nothing, and from what I heard, she left it loudly. I closed my eyes and I could see the whole thing. Meredith at the counter, her chin high, her voice sharp, absolutely certain that money would appear the way it always had. Because to Meredith, money was not something you earned. It was something that was simply there like air. She had never once asked where the air came from. There is more, Ramona said. Wade tried to move money this morning to cover his car payment. The payment that always cleared month after month like clockwork. It bounced. Insufficient funds. He did not know the transfers had stopped. He was counting on the money being there the way it had always been there, because for 8 years it always had. That car payment had never once come from Wade. It came from me. He simply never knew it. He had built his entire adult life on a foundation he could not see, and now for the first time his foot went through the floor. I want to tell you I felt triumphant in that moment. I did not. What I felt was a strange, quiet ache, and underneath the ache, something steadier. A sense of balance. For 8 years, the scale had tipped hard to one side, all of it my weight holding them up. Now finally, it was beginning to level. There was one detail that stayed with me all that day, small and sharp. In the middle of all of it, while the cards died and the payments bounced, Meredith's show dog Duchess was still eating from a bright bag of meadowbark in their pantry. My food. The recipe I had built on my own stove the year my husband died to save a sick dog when I had nothing. Meredith had praised that brand at a dozen family dinners. She had called it the only food good enough for her precious Duchess, and in the same breath she had mocked the bargain scraps she assumed I fed my own dog. She never knew she was feeding her pampered animal the thing that had lifted me out of poverty. She never knew the plain old woman at the end of the table had invented the very thing she trusted most. That was the shape of their blindness. They were surrounded by me on every side, and they could not see a single thread of it. I thought about a night from years before, a night I had never told anyone. It was one of the early holidays after Wade married Meredith. I had brought a homemade dish to their table, something simple I had cooked with care. Meredith had taken one look at it, wrinkled her nose, and quietly slid it to the far end of the counter where no one would touch it. Then she served a catered plate and made a joke about how some people never learn what real quality is. Everyone laughed. Wade laughed too. I had smiled and said nothing, and I had driven home that night and told myself it did not matter. But it had mattered. It had all mattered, every small cut stacked one on top of another for 8 years until the pile was tall enough to see. People think a person breaks all at once. They do not. A person breaks the way a rope breaks one thin strand at a time, quietly until only one strand is left. At that birthday dinner, Meredith had cut the last strand herself. That afternoon, I drove back to my real office, and I sat at my real desk in the chair where I made the decisions that mattered, and I looked out the window at the Fort Worth skyline. Somewhere out there in a shining condominium tower, my son and his wife were beginning to panic. They were calling banks. They were checking accounts. They were staring at declined cards and bounced payments, trying to understand how their perfect life had developed a crack overnight. They did not know that every part of that life had a hidden thread running back to this quiet room. The tower they lived in, the food in their pantry, the cards in their wallets, the car in their parking space. I had woven all of it thread by thread, and now I had simply stopped holding the loom. I want to be honest about the 2 lives I had been living because it is the heart of this whole story. In one life, I was Bonnie the widow, the woman my family pitied. In the other, I was the founder of a company that fed dogs in homes across the country and employed dozens of people who counted on me. In one life, my daughter-in-law slid my cooking to the end of the counter. In the other, buyers from national chains flew in to shake my hand and thank me for changing their business. I had kept those 2 lives sealed apart for so long that even I sometimes forgot they belonged to the same woman. But sitting at my real desk that afternoon, I felt them begin to come together, and I understood that they had to. The wall between them had cost me too much. I had built that wall to protect my family from the truth. Instead, it had taught them to despise a woman who did not exist, a poor, helpless creature I had invented for their comfort. It was time to tear the wall down and let them meet the woman who had been standing behind it the entire time. Franklin knocked and came in with a single sheet of paper. Cedar Hollow's records, he said, and set it in front of me. It laid out the arrears in plain columns. 3 months behind on the true rent, and that was only counting the months since we had started tracking the real number instead of the subsidized one. Beneath the surface of their beautiful life, they had been drowning for a long time. My money had been the only thing keeping their heads above the water. Now the water was rising, and there was no hand reaching down to pull them up. Serve the notice, I told Franklin. Do it exactly by the law. 30 days written proper. No shortcuts. I will not have anyone say I did this crooked. He nodded and left to give the instruction to Donna Reyes, the property manager who ran the building day to day, and who had no idea the woman giving the order through a chain of companies was the same plain old woman she sometimes saw in the lobby. On the 4th day, my phone finally lit up with a message from Wade. It was short and casual, the way you text someone when you are pretending nothing is wrong. Mom, are you okay? We have not heard from you in a while. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on my desk and did not answer. He had not wondered if I was okay 2 weeks earlier when his wife called me a burden, and he studied his plate in silence. He wondered now because now the money had stopped, and in his mind those two facts had to be connected somehow, even if he could not yet see how. 2 hours later, a second message. Mom, please answer. Meredith feels terrible about what she said. She was under a lot of stress. Stress. I actually laughed out loud in my empty office. Meredith did not know the meaning of the word. Real stress was cleaning office floors at midnight so your child could eat. Real stress was studying dog nutrition at a library table because you could not afford the medicine your family needed. Real stress was lying awake at 30 years old, a widow with a 4-year-old asleep down the hall doing arithmetic in the dark and coming up short every single time. That was stress. Not choosing between one designer bag and another. I did not answer that message either. Over the next few days, the pattern deepened. Wade texted every morning. Then he began to call. I let every call go to voicemail. The messages he left changed in tone as the days passed. At first, they were light. Then they grew careful. Then they grew tight with worry. Mom, I need to talk to you. It is important. Please call me back. Meanwhile, the formal machinery moved exactly as Ramona had promised, no faster and no slower than the law allowed. Cedar Hollow's written notice went out a proper 30-day notice of non-renewal and demand for the arrears delivered and documented. Donna Reyes filed her copies. The bank sent its statements. Everything was clean. Everything was on the record. There was nothing for anyone to fight because I had done every step by the book. I sat in my plain house each night with my rescue dog at my feet, the little brown mixed breed I had named Biscuit after the first one, and I felt the strange calm of a person who has finally stopped carrying a weight she was never meant to carry alone. I was not enjoying their suffering, but I was no longer preventing it either. For 8 years I had thrown myself under them every time they stumbled so they never learned that stumbling hurts. Now they were learning, and learning I had come to believe was the only gift left that could actually help them. On the 6th day, Wade came to my house. He rang the doorbell over and over. I sat in my armchair and listened to every ring. Mom, I know you are home, he called through the door. Your car is in the driveway. Please open up. I did not move. After 20 minutes, he gave up and left, and a little while later a voicemail arrived, his voice cracking. Mom, I do not understand what I did wrong. I just want to talk to you. I miss you. But he had not missed me the week before. He had not missed me while his wife called me wait to be shed. He had not missed me while Whitney insulted me in his living room. He had not missed me while he sat there my own son and let it all happen without a single word. Silence. I had decided a long time ago as a kind of answer, and he had given me his answer at that dinner. By the end of the 2nd week, the collapse was no longer a crack. It was a spreading fracture running through every corner of their lives. The cards were dead. The rent was due at its true brutal number, and the arrears were on the books. The car payment had bounced, and the next one was coming. The notice was served, the clock was running, and Meredith and Wade were beginning to understand that this was not a bank error, not a mix-up, not a temporary glitch. This was the ground itself giving way. And on the night that everything finally came together, the night the reality of it all landed at once, my phone rang at 2 a.m. It was Meredith. She was crying so hard she could barely speak. Please, she said. Please answer. Something happened tonight, and I think it has to do with you. I had known she would call. I had known the exact shape of this moment for 2 weeks. And when it finally came, I did the one thing that none of them had ever expected the quiet old woman in the discount coat to be capable of. I listened, and I did not say a word. Meredith's words tumbled out in a flood I could barely follow. A notice had been taped to their door that evening, a real one official demanding money they did not have and telling them their time in the building was ending. The cards were dead. The bank would not explain anything. Wade had locked himself in the bathroom and would not come out. And through all of it, Meredith kept circling back to the same terrified thought, the one that had made her call me at 2 a.m. This all started the night you left, she sobbed. Everything was fine, and then you walked out that door, and now it is all falling apart. I do not understand how, but it has to do with you. I know it does, please, Bonnie. Please come back, please fix it. You always fix it. I held the phone to my ear and I said nothing. I let her cry. I let her beg. I let the silence stretch until she finally ran out of words. And then very quietly I spoke. I hope you and Wade figure it out, I said. Good night, Meredith. And I hung up. I set the phone on the nightstand and I lay back down in the dark. My heart was steady. She had been right about one thing, of course. It did have to do with me. It had everything to do with me. But she had it backward. Their life had not fallen apart because I left. It had been held together for 8 years only because I was there unseen underneath all of it, holding the weight. The moment I stepped out from under it, gravity did the rest. They had simply never known I was there. The next days brought a storm of contact. Wade texted every morning and called every afternoon. The voicemails piled up and I listened to each one because I wanted to hear how the tone changed. First came confusion, then worry, then something close to fear. "Mom, I do not know what is happening. The bank keeps saying there is an issue with the corporate account we were on, and my transfers did not come this month. Please, I need to understand. Please call me." He came to the house twice more. He stood on my porch and rang the bell and called through the door, and both times I sat in my armchair with my old dog at my feet and did not move. I was not being cruel. I was letting him feel for the first time in his adult life what it is to knock on a door and have no one open it. He had let a door close on me at that dinner. He needed to learn what was on the other side of a closed door. Then Meredith changed her approach entirely. The anger and the panic gave way to sweetness. She began leaving voicemails in a soft, almost childlike voice, the kind you use on someone you are trying to coax. "Bonnie, it is me. I miss you so much. I know I said some things at dinner that came out wrong. You know how I am, I speak before I think. But I love you. Call me. I need to talk to you about something important." A few days later, a courier arrived at my door with a box. Inside was a set of expensive chocolates, the kind that cost $80, wrapped in gold paper. Tucked in with them was a handwritten card in Meredith's perfect practiced calligraphy. "Dear Bonnie, I have been thinking about you so much. I have not been the daughter-in-law you deserve. Sometimes life puts us under stress and we say things we do not mean. You have always been important to us, to me. Wade is so worried. Please let us come see you. We miss you. With love, Meredith." I read the card twice. Then I walked next door and gave the whole box to my neighbor Gladys, who was delighted and asked no questions. I did not need chocolates wrapped in gold paper and hollow words. I had been bought cheaply my whole life with a smile here and a thank you there. I was done being bought. But the card did something Meredith never intended. It made me curious, because the words were too smooth, too fast, too eager. A person who is truly sorry does not send a catalog of apologies within a week. A person who is scared of losing something does. And I wanted to know exactly what Meredith was so afraid of losing and what she had been planning before the money ran out. So I did what I had done my whole life. I went looking. I had built a company from nothing by reading contracts. Other people skimmed and by watching what people did instead of listening to what they said. I still had instincts and I still had people who owed me favors. I made a few quiet calls. I asked Ramona to make a few of her own. And what I found turned the last of my sadness into something hard and cold. 2 months before that birthday dinner, Meredith and Whitney had gone to see a lawyer. Not about their own affairs, about mine. They had asked that lawyer how a family could take control of an aging relative. They had used careful words, but the meaning was plain. They wanted to know how to obtain power of attorney over me and how to have me declared unable to manage my own life, so they could move me into an assisted living facility and take charge of what they assumed were my few small assets. They believed my whole estate was one modest house in an old neighborhood, a house they could sell out from under me the moment they had control. They had looked at the plain old woman in the discount coat and decided she was not just an embarrassment. She was a thing to be managed, emptied out, and put away. Here is what saved me, and here is what they never understood. In Texas, you cannot simply take control of a grown adult because you find her inconvenient. Guardianship of a competent adult is not a form you fill out. It is a court proceeding. It requires clear and convincing evidence that the person truly cannot care for herself. It requires a physician to examine her and sign a formal certificate of incapacity dated within a narrow window before any filing. And the court is required to prefer the least restrictive option and to protect the rights of the person at every step. The lawyer they consulted had told them the truth. Without a doctor willing to certify that I was incapacitated, and I was as sharp as I had ever been in my life, they had nothing. Their scheme was dead before it started. It was predatory. And it was doomed. And when I understood the full shape of it, something in me that had still been aching finally went quiet. I had spent days feeling guilty for the suffering I was causing my son. Now I saw the truth clearly. I had not created this. I had only stopped preventing it. These were people who, given the chance and the belief that I was helpless, had gone to a lawyer to try to lock me away and take what little they thought I had. They had not been rescued from anything by my generosity. My generosity had simply hidden from me exactly who they were. I was not a victim in this story. I want to be very clear about that. I was not a poor old woman waiting to be saved. I had seen the knife and I had caught the hand that held it, and I had done it myself quietly before it ever reached me. That knowledge changed how I carried myself for the rest of it. The guilt was gone. What remained was purpose. There was one more thing I learned, and it settled the matter completely. It was Whitney who had pushed the idea. Whitney, the sister from abroad who had swept in 6 months earlier and decided the plain old woman at the family table was a liability to be handled. She had done this before. Ramona's contacts turned up a pattern. Whitney had a habit of arriving in people's lives, sizing up what they had, and rearranging everyone around her own advantage. She had looked at me and seen a small house and a slow old woman, and she had gone to work on her sister the way a person works a loose thread, pulling and pulling until the whole thing unravels. Meredith had been cruel, but Meredith was also a follower. Whitney was the one who drew the map. I did not hate them for it, strangely. Hate takes energy, and I needed all of mine for what came next. What I felt instead was a cold, clean clarity. I finally saw all three of them without the soft blur of hope I had kept over my own eyes for 8 years. Wade weak where he should have been strong. Meredith hollow where she should have had substance. Whitney sharp where she should have had a heart. And me standing in the middle of them, done pretending I could not see. I began to plan the ending. Not a punishment. A reckoning. A night where the truth would finally sit at the head of the table, where I had always been treated like furniture. I called Ramona and told her to start preparing. I told Franklin what I needed, and I let the days move toward it. Then, on the 20th day since that dinner, the plan changed because my phone rang with a number I did not recognize, and I answered it out of instinct. Mrs. Hollingsworth, a woman's voice said, "This is Dr. Prescott at the medical center downtown. Your son Wade is here in our emergency department." My heart stopped in my chest. "What happened?" I said. "Is he alive?" "He is stable," she said quickly. "He is going to be fine. He had a severe panic attack. His wife brought him in about an hour ago. His heart rate spiked, he could not breathe, and he was convinced he was having a heart attack. It was not his heart. It was stress and anxiety extreme, but not dangerous. He is asking for you. You are listed as an emergency contact. You can come if you would like." I was already reaching for my keys. Everything I had built up over those weeks. The calm, the coldness, the careful distance, all of it evaporated in a single second. Because underneath the founder and the strategist and the woman with the plan, I was still and would always be his mother. He was my baby. He was the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. He was in a hospital afraid calling for me. Nothing else in the world mattered in that moment. I drove to the medical center with my hands tight on the wheel. When I walked into the waiting area, I found Meredith there alone, her face swollen from crying, her makeup running in dark lines down her cheeks. When she saw me, she jumped up and rushed toward me, and before I could react, she threw her arms around me and held on. "Thank you for coming," she said into my shoulder over and over. "Thank you. He would not stop asking for you. I was so scared, Bonnie. I thought he was going to die." I let her hold on for a moment. Then I gently stepped back. "Where is he?" I asked. "Room 4, she said. "The doctor said you could go in." I walked down the cold, bright hallway past the smell of disinfectant that will forever remind me of the worst days of my life. I had walked halls like this before. I had walked one the night they told me Leonard was gone. I had slept in chairs like these when Wade was small and sick with pneumonia. Hospitals are places where the masks come off, where none of the surface things matter anymore. Wade was on the bed, hooked to a monitor, his eyes closed, tears sliding down toward his ears. When he heard my footsteps, he opened his eyes. "Mom," he whispered. His voice was the voice of a frightened child, not a grown man of 42. I sat in the chair beside the bed and I took his hand. It was cold and shaking. "I am here," I said. "I thought I was dying," he said. My chest hurt so much I could not breathe, and all I could think was that I was going to die without ever telling you. I was sorry. The tears came faster now, and he did not try to stop them. "I was a coward, Mom. I let Meredith treat you like nothing. I let Whitney insult you in my own home. I sat there at that table and I stared at my plate while my wife told you that you did not matter, and I said nothing. And I do not even have a good reason. I think I was ashamed. Ashamed to admit my life was not what I pretended it was. Ashamed that I needed help. Ashamed that I was not the man everyone thought I was. I held his hand and let him talk. And now everything is gone, he said. The condo. Probably my job soon the way I have been at work. And the worst part is that I lost you. And you were the only real thing I ever had. I looked at my son for a long moment. And then I asked him the question that mattered. And what was I to you, Wade, all those years, I said, before it all fell apart? He closed his eyes. You were the person who was always there, he said, and I took you completely for granted. I assumed you would always be available, always forgiving, always fine. I never asked how you felt. I never once asked if you needed anything. I only ever took. There was honesty in it, real pain. But honesty at a bedside is easy. It is the days after that are hard. So I told him the truth gently because I loved him and because he needed to hear it. I love you, Wade, I said. You are my son and you always will be. But love is not the same thing as being your safety net, so you can keep falling the same way forever. And there are things about me you do not know, things I have kept hidden for a very long time. He looked at me confused. What things, he asked. In 2 weeks, I said, there is going to be a dinner. You will be there, and Meredith and I am going to invite Whitney too. At that dinner, you are going to find out who I really am. You are going to learn things that will change everything you think you know about me and about your own life. And after that night, you are going to decide what kind of relationship you want with me. One built on the truth, or none at all. Mom, he said, I do not understand. You, Will, I said. I stood and touched his hair the way I used to when he was small and woke from a nightmare. For now, rest. The doctor says your body just sounded an alarm. You would be wise to listen to it. I walked out of that room before he could ask anything more. In the hallway, I took out my phone and called Ramona. Reserve the private room at the rooftop restaurant, I said. 2 weeks from Saturday, 7 in the evening. I want you there and Franklin too. And prepare the folders. All of it. Every document. Every statement. Every truth. It is time my family finally met me. For the 2 weeks that followed, I prepared for that dinner, the way I prepared for the meetings that had built my company. Nothing was left to chance. Ramona reserved the private room at the rooftop restaurant overlooking the water and the skyline. I had a technician install a large screen along one wall. I had 3 folders made bound in dark leather, each stamped with the crest of Whitfield Provisions, each holding years of hidden truth. And on the morning of the dinner, I got dressed as the woman I actually was and not the one I had pretended to be for so long. I put on a tailored suit in pearl gray, real heels the kind I never wore in front of my family. I pinned my hair into a smooth, elegant knot and put on the pearl earrings that had been my mother's. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see the widow in the discount coat. I saw the founder. I saw the woman who had cleaned offices at midnight and studied nutrition by library light and built something out of nothing while raising a boy alone. I had hidden her for 8 years to keep the peace. There would be no more hiding. I arrived early. Ramona was already there in a crisp navy suit, checking that every place was set. Franklin came a few minutes later, precise as always, a portfolio under his arm. The table was long and dark, the chairs deep and quiet, the glasses catching the last of the evening light. In one corner stood the screen. On the table sat 3 folders with 3 names in gold. Wade, Meredith, Whitney. At 7, the staff told me my guests had arrived. Make them wait 5 minutes in the lobby, I said, then bring them up. When the door finally opened, I watched their faces do something I will remember for the rest of my life. Wade came in first in one of the few suits he had not yet been forced to sell. He was pale and thin. Meredith followed in a plain black dress, no jewelry, her hair pulled back smaller somehow than I had ever seen her. Whitney came last, still holding on to her air of superiority, but there was a crack in it now. And all 3 of them stopped dead when they saw me. Not the Bonnie they knew. This version. Seated at the head of a long table in a tailored suit, flanked by a lawyer and an executive who were very clearly not there by accident. Mom, Wade said. His voice was unsure. You look different. Sit down, please, I said, and I gestured to the chairs across from me. They sat slowly looking at one another, looking at the screen, looking at the folders with their own names written in gold. Whitney was the first to find her voice. What is all this, she said. I thought this was a family dinner. It is, I said. A family dinner where we are finally going to tell the truth. Let me introduce you properly. This is Ramona Kessler, my attorney and my business partner for 40 years. And this is Franklin Vance, the chief operating officer of my companies. Wade blinked. Your companies, he said. Mom, what are you talking about? I leaned back in my chair, and I looked at the three of them with a calm I had rehearsed for 2 weeks and felt to my bones. I am talking about the fact that for the last 8 years, the three of you have been living inside a story, and I am the one who wrote it. Every page, every dollar, every quiet thread you never bothered to follow back to its source. Ramona rose and stepped to the screen. She touched the remote, and the first image appeared. It was a summary of financial support laid out in clean columns, the numbers large enough to read from across the room. This is a record of the support Bonnie provided to Wade and Meredith over the past 8 years. Ramona set her voice even and professional. It includes direct transfers, credit balances paid in full each month, the wedding, the automobile, the vacations, and the difference between the true market rent of their home and what they were actually charged. The total comes to approximately $1.2 million. Every figure is documented. Every gift above the annual limit was reported to the tax authorities by Bonnie's accountant. This was all done properly and all done quietly. Meredith put her hand over her mouth. Wade sat frozen, staring at the screen as if it might change if he looked hard enough. Whitney, for the first time since I had known her, had nothing to say. Ramona changed the image. Now the individual months appeared one after another. The condo, the car, the honeymoon, a designer bag, a trip to Europe, each with a date, each with an amount. And with each one, Wade sank a little lower in his chair. That trip to Europe, Whitney said suddenly, her voice thin. Wade told me he got a bonus at work. Wade never got a bonus, I said. Or rather, he told himself he did every single time because it was easier than asking where the money truly came from. An imaginary bonus, a lucky investment, a generous client. Whatever story let him avoid the truth. And the truth was that his mother was underneath all of it, holding it up. Then I let the biggest threads show themselves. The building you live in, I said, is owned by a company called Cedar Hollow Holdings. Cedar Hollow is mine. I bought that building years ago. I made you tenants, and I charged you less than half of what the home was worth. And when you fell behind, which was often, I quietly absorbed it and never said a word. You thought you had a distant, forgiving landlord. You had me. Meredith made a small, broken sound. And the food, I said. I looked at her directly. The food you feed your show dog. The premium brand you praised at this family's table a dozen times. The one you called the only food good enough for Duchess, right before you mocked the scraps you assumed I fed my own dog. I built that company. I cooked the first batch of it on my own stove the year Wade's father died to save a sick dog when I had nothing. It is called Meadowbark. It is mine. You have been feeding your dog my life's work and laughing at me while you did it. Meredith was crying openly now. Whitney had gone white, and Wade looked like a man watching the floor of his entire life fold away beneath him. But I was not finished, because there was one more thing in that story, and it was the part that mattered most. Wade, I said. Do you remember the handbag I carried out of your condo that night? The worn one Meredith always looked at like it was something she stepped in. He nodded barely. There was a folder inside it, I said. Ramona had prepared it that very afternoon. It was signed and ready. It was a plan to transfer a controlling stake in Meadowbark to you, my company. $40 million in value, and the legacy I built from nothing meant to become yours. I carried it into your home that night. I was going to give it to you at your birthday dinner. It was in my bag against my hip the entire time your wife told me I did not matter enough to keep around, and you looked at your plate and let her say it. The room went utterly silent. Wade's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Your cruelty did not cost you an allowance, I said quietly. It cost you a company. It cost you everything I ever intended to leave you. Then Franklin took the remote, and Ramona nodded to me, and I gave the last turn of the knife, the one that told them I had never been the helpless old woman they imagined for even a single day. You believe I found out about all of this after the dinner, I said. You believe I reacted. I did not react. I knew. I had known for a long time. Franklin pressed play, and my own voice filled the room, and then Meredith's, and then Whitney's. It was the birthday dinner, the whole thing. I had recorded it lawfully because I was sitting right there, and Texas allows a person to record a conversation she is part of. Every word played back into that quiet room. Meredith telling me I did not matter. Whitney calling me unnecessary weight. And underneath it all, my son's silence loud as a slammed door. Then Franklin played one more thing. A phone call from days later when Meredith had thought she was being clever. Her own voice sweet on the surface, telling me how she could not wait for the cheap anonymous landlord to be dealt with, so they could finally live somewhere befitting them. She had said it directly to me on a call I was part of, never dreaming the cheap anonymous landlord was the woman on the other end of the line. I did not stumble into this, I said when the recording stopped. I did not lash out in pain. I had seen exactly who you were. I had documented it. And I chose the moment. I have been 3 steps ahead of all of you since the night you decided I was disposable. Ramona placed the 3 leather folders in front of them. Open them, I said. With shaking hands, they did. Inside was the rest of the truth, the part no recording could show. Oh, property deeds, corporate balance sheets, the real scope of a life I had kept sealed away. Wade turned the pages slowly, and I watched the numbers register on his face, one after another. This says you own the whole building, he said faintly. Not part of it, all of it. Free and clear. I do, I said. He kept reading. And this. He looked up, and his voice failed him. Mom, this says you have funded college scholarships. Dozens of them. 26 students, I said, over the last 12 years. Young people from neighborhoods like the one you grew up in who could not have gone otherwise. I never put my name on a single one. I also helped rebuild the children's ward at the hospital where you had pneumonia when you were 6. Anonymously. You slept in that ward as a boy. Years later, I paid to make it better for other people's children, and I never told a soul. Whitney made a small sound and pressed her hand to her mouth. She had spent 6 months certain she was the sophisticated one at the table, the one who understood value and worth. And she was sitting across from a woman who had quietly changed the lives of strangers for a decade, while wearing a discount coat and driving a scratched old car, asking nothing, taking no credit, letting the whole world underestimate her. That is who I am, I said. That is who was sitting at the end of your table every holiday while you decided I was an embarrassment. I did not need you to know. I only needed you to be decent. And that was the one thing none of you could manage. That was when Wade broke. He stood up so fast his chair fell backward and cracked against the floor. And then my son, 42 years old, dropped to his knees in front of me and began to sob in a way I had not heard since he was a small boy. I know, he said. I know, and I hate myself for it. Every day since that dinner I have hated myself more. I have asked myself 1,000 times why I did not stand up, why I did not defend you, and the only answer I have is that I was a coward. I was so afraid of losing the life I pretended to have that I betrayed the only person who was ever truly on my side. And I know now where all of it came from. I spent my whole life feeling like I had to be extraordinary to be worthy of everything you gave up for me. Rich, impressive, better than I was, because anything less felt like an insult to your sacrifice. So I built a fake life to prove I deserved you, and in doing it I lost you. I looked down at my son on his knees, and my heart, the same heart that had held cold and steady through everything, finally cracked all the way open. Wait, I said. You were always enough. From the day you were born, you were enough. You never had to be rich to be worthy of me. You only had to see me. And for 8 years you did not. I know that now, he wept. Please, I do not deserve your forgiveness. But please give me a chance to be the son I should have been. Here is what I had decided in the 2 weeks I spent planning that night. I am not a woman who takes revenge by burning people to the ground. I am a woman who teaches lessons, hard ones when they are needed, but always with a door left open on the other side. So I did not destroy them. I set terms. Get up, I said. He rose, wiping his face. I forgive the money, I said. All of it. The 1.2 million. It was a gift even when you did not know it was a gift, and I do not want $1 of it back. But forgiveness is not the same as returning to the way things were. If we are going to have a relationship at all, it will have conditions, and you will meet every one of them. They listened as if their lives depended on it, because in a way they did. Wade, you will begin therapy. You need to understand why your worth got tangled up in things you could buy, and until you do, you will make these same mistakes forever. Meredith, you will get a real job. Not something glamorous. Something honest where you learn what a hard-earned dollar feels like in your hand. You will both move out of that condominium. Not tonight, not thrown into the street. Lawfully, on the proper notice, into a small apartment you will pay for yourselves out of your own income, and I want to see the receipts. And once a month, for as long as it takes, you will come to dinner at my plain little house, the one you called old and depressing, and you will tell me the truth about your lives, the real version, not the one you post for strangers." Wade nodded through his tears. "Anything," he said. "Anything." Then I turned to Whitney, who had sat silent and shaking through all of it. "You fly home in 2 days," I said. "I cannot make you do anything. But understand me clearly. Your poison almost cost my son his mother. You looked at a woman you thought had nothing and decided she could be emptied out and put away. So go home and think hard about the kind of person you want to be. Because if you ever come near this family again with that contempt, there will not be a second chance." "I understand," she whispered, and for once I believed she did. 3 months later, on a night that had become our monthly ritual, my doorbell rang. It was Wade and Meredith standing on my porch with a bottle of inexpensive wine and a bunch of grocery store flowers. "It is not much," Wade said with a shy, careful smile. "But we paid for it ourselves." "It is perfect," I said, and I meant it. They had changed in ways I could see. Wade was thinner but healthier, sleeping again. He had been demoted at work after the season that nearly broke him, and he was rebuilding his standing one honest day at a time. Meredith had taken an administrative job at an accounting office. The pay was modest and the work was plain, and she showed up every day and did it. She wore clothes from ordinary stores now, and she looked more real than she ever had in $15,000 of wedding lace. Over dinner at my oak table, they told me the truth about their lives. The apartment was small. Meredith admitted she still missed the view sometimes. But there was something clean about living inside their actual means. She said something that let her stop performing a life she could not afford. Wade told me his therapist had helped him see that he had spent 40 years trying to earn a love that had always been free. 6 months after that dinner on the rooftop, my phone rang with a number from overseas. It was Whitney. "I have no right to call," she said. "But I needed to tell you something. I left the public relations firm. I could not keep selling elegant lies for a living. I took a job with a nonprofit that helps women start small businesses with almost nothing the way you did. I earn half of what I made before. And I wake up in the morning feeling like my life means something. You showed me that a person's worth is not what they project. It is who they are when they think no one important is watching. Thank you for that." I told her I was glad, and I was. I renovated my house that spring. Nothing grand. I would never be a grand person, but comfortable and warm in mine. New paint on the walls that had needed it for years. A repaired garden. A porch where I could sit in the evening. I stopped wearing the disguise of poverty because I no longer had anything to hide from the people I loved. On the shelf by the window, I keep an old worn collar. It belonged to the first Biscuit, the sick little dog I could not afford to feed the one who sent me to the library at night and put me on the road to everything that came after. My whole life grew out of that one small act of refusing to give up on something I loved. I like to look at that collar and remember. Not long ago, a photograph came to my phone from Wade. It showed the two of them in their small apartment, standing in front of a homemade dinner, smiling in a way I had not seen on either of them in years. Underneath it, he had written, "We cooked it ourselves. It is not fancy, but it is ours. Thank you for teaching us the difference." I looked at that picture for a long time. It was not the glittering life they used to show the world, the one built on my hidden money and their shared pretending. It was small. It was honest. It was theirs. And that made it worth more than everything they had lost. I settled into my chair by the window with my old dog at my feet, and I felt the evening sun on my face, and I found that I regretted nothing. Not the years I gave. Not the night I took it all away. Not the truth I finally laid on that rooftop table. Because in the end, it was never about punishing anyone. It was about tearing down a wall I had built with my own hands, the wall that let the people I loved despise a woman who was never really there. I had spent 8 years being invisible. I had decided at last that I deserved to be seen. And the strangest, truest thing I learned is this. Silence can hold a family together for years. But when silence finally breaks, it destroys everything false in its path. And only then in the wreckage does it leave room to build something real. I am still building. So are they. And for the first time in a very long time, we are building it out of the truth, which is the only foundation that ever holds.